welcome to Slayerfest 98. I'm your host, Ian Carlos Crawford, and joining me for this episode, I have X-Men royalty. He was the showrunner of X-Men the Animated, one of the showrunners of X-Men the Animated series, Eric Lewald, and she was one of the writers of the show, Julia Lewald. Hello.
Hello.
It's so nice to see your faces again.
Yeah, it's been a while. Hello again.
Yeah. So with X-Men coming back and with how still relevant the animated series is today, I figured I'm gonna start going through it episode by episode. You guys were on before, and it was just I did a summer where I celebrated X-Men and just did a few like here and there episodes. And I figured who better to kick off the coverage than the two of you. Julia, remind me, were you on the show from the start or did you come in later?
I'm going to say I was on the show from the start because I was there when he got the phone call saying the meeting you're coming into tomorrow where you thought you were going to be story editing show A, B, C, X, Y, Z. That's not happening. You're coming in tomorrow morning to be there for the meeting about the creation and development of X-Men.
So it was a Sunday night
at our home.
And the meeting was Monday morning.
Yeah.
And then when we had about 3 weeks to develop the first 13 episode arc and write the pilot, Mark Edens and I, we did it at our dining room table. So Julia was hovering through and going through reading drafts. So she was aware from the beginning, and ended up writing a couple episodes, ended up getting a couple more of her story ideas made, but ended up getting other shows that she was assigned to, like Skeleton Warriors, where she was on CBS, where she was the showrunner. So we lost her for large chunks of time during the course of the 5 years of the show. But she was there pretty much for at least to talk through every episode.
There was no writer's room or studio that had a central spot for anyone on the writing side to get together. It was our dining room. That was it.
So that was, we'd assign an episode to a writer. He'd go off or she'd go off and write for a week and hand me a floppy disk. And because the internet wasn't really up yet and you couldn't really send files. And I'd polish it and make notes and get everybody else's input, and they'd write some more. And so it was basically, as I say, it wasn't a writer's room. It was basically, say, if it was one that Julia wrote, she'd write on it, I'd write on it, and I'd do the managing part about it with all the various, with Marvel and Fox and standards and practices. I'd do all the housekeeping on it, and it would go in. So it was basically 2 people wrote every episode. There was no 11 people giving notes. I mean, a writer's room, everybody pitching in to make an episode. It was, if the writer's name's on it, it was that writer and me, and that's it.
I mean, and I want to also mention, since this is your kicking off X-Men look back at the episodes, when you got tapped, Eric, to take the comic book and develop it for TV, his name's on every episode. There was no faith in the people above Margaret Lash, president of Fox Kids at the time, that this show would work at all. You were hired to do a 13-episode run. We all were, and the writers and the artists were all let go when we finished the first season. And then when it was a surprise huge hit, they had to try to hire, and they were able to hire most of us back, but other people had other commitments. So, we lost some folks because they just didn't realize what they had.
It's so funny to me. You guys have talked about this before, and it's wild to me that, I mean, I guess this still goes on, right? The writers are not treated as well as but I tell everyone the stories you guys have told me, because that is just wild that they were like, 13 episodes, let everyone go, no big deal. And then we're like, oh wait, people like this. And what I've been curious about this, because I was worried with like HBO Max. I didn't know if it was going to still have all the same stuff. So I did my first ever rewatch of Batman the Animated Series, and there's a lot of parallels with both shows. I think one of you said this last time you were on, you didn't want to dumb it down, and lots of times that's what they wanted you to do. They'd be like, do this for toys, and like both cartoons very much had like I mean, not like adults, but you know what I mean? Like more mature storytelling. And I don't know. I think that as a kid, I was like, what, like 8? And I loved that. That drew me to it. I was like, I wanted every cartoon to feel as adult to me as those two cartoons did. And I don't know that I don't know that companies would let you guys get away with the like adult themes you had
anymore. They may not. I mean, it was kind of we didn't know it at the time. It was kind of a golden age for us.
Yeah.
Margaret and Sydney were there at Fox for 4 or 5 years.
Margaret president, Sydney Iwanner, her right-hand man.
And they were our bosses, our creative bosses. It wasn't Marvel. They were who we took notes from, and they were the ones that gave us opportunity and pushed us to make the shows more adult, because they had faith that kids would respond to younger kids would respond to it. And then we get older kids and women, because half the cast was female.
Yeah.
And we've gotten even worse pushback on that on other shows, like, oh no, this is supposed to be boys adventure, get rid of all the girl characters kind of stuff. So those two people, executives don't always get credit for making great shows, but if they'd wanted it dumbed down and boys only, that's what we would have written, because that's what we would have been paid for.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Batman as well. And again, all credit to Margaret Loesch, Fox Kids, because she was really trying to push some boundaries to establish a new network. People don't remember 30 years ago, there was ABC, NBC, CBS. Those are your Saturday morning options, plus your local syndicated. And Fox was trying to become a network. Yeah. And they were willing to take chances, and Margaret was the tip of that spear.
Yeah, and they were getting 5 or 10% of the country, and now their networks are getting 90, between the three of them. And man, X-Men came out and they were getting 50% of the country, and it was that big of a shift
that quickly.
Batman helped a little, because they came out early. They came out 3 months early,
and it's brilliant.
And Power Rangers gave it another boost when they came out a year later. But the big shift was during the first 3 months of X-Men. Fox went from a distant fourth to a distant first in those few months.
What do you guys know? Because I was thinking about this what I'm doing is I'm gonna go back and forth, like one X-Men episode, one Batman episode. Just
sure.
Oh, sure.
I figured that's like a good way to bring in both, but I feel like a lot of the same people like both. A lot of like folks my age grew up with them. And I only realized this recently, that X-Men was just Saturdays and Batman was like Monday through Friday, right? Was there
they adjusted? They both started out just Saturdays.
Okay.
And then as they made deals with local TV stations to syndicate it Monday through Friday, there were some like FCC rules about that, about Fox could do it, but other networks couldn't. Whatever it was, they shifted to 6 days a week, both series, as quickly as they could.
Okay.
For the afternoon block when kids came home from school.
Because that was like the excitement of getting home from school. And did you ever? So we recently covered for the 30th anniversary Batman Returns, and I didn't remember this, but one of my co-hosts, Adam, brought up there was like wild backlash to that movie, and I didn't remember that. And he sent clips from like talk shows where like parents were mad about, it was too adult, it was too dark, it was, all that like dumb. But you guys didn't quite get that, right? Like that kind of.
We didn't. I think there was. It was weird. We were expecting it.
Yes.
And the network was really worried that there's way too much violence and the shows were way too adult, and they were worried about getting angry parent letters, but
right.
They're also worried that kids would tune out, that it wouldn't appeal to them. But oddly, there was something about the nature of the X-Men. I mean, Batman's more crime-ridden and dark and vengeance-filled, and X-Men's more like a dysfunctional family that tries to help each other. Yeah. So in a real kind of core way, even though there's more action and possibly more violence in an X-Men episode than in a Batman episode, I don't think it comes across as violent to the families that watch it. I think it comes across as, helpful and positive, even though it's tough and people are blowing up cities and wanting to kill each other. There's something underneath it that made it palatable for America, and we never were hit with lots of bad letters. The joke was at Fox, the series that got all the nasty letters was Beetlejuice,
which you worked on
which I worked on for a year with Margaret and Sydney before we started X-Men, and that's why I got the job. But because Beetlejuice was this demon from hell.
Yeah.
I mean, you start out, so you've got a certain percentage of the country that is not going to be pleased with a fun show about a demon from hell. So yeah, X-Men didn't get a tenth the bad press that Beetlejuice did from concerned families and organizations.
Yeah. That's funny. I didn't realize you had worked on it, because if anything, my child brain remembers that cartoon better than the I often forget that in the movie they're not friends, because in the cartoon they are. And as a kid, I always wanted there to be another movie where they were friends, so it could be like the cartoon.
Well, we'll see. We hear they're coming out with another one, with Beetlejuice too.
And wasn't it Allison Court voiced Julie and Lydia, right?
She did both.
Yeah, I love that. I remember back then always it'd be as a kid, so I didn't know the names, but I'd recognize the voice. I'd be like, wait, that's the person who's this superhero and they're doing, and that was so cool. Did most of the cartoons outsource to Canada for the voice actors?
A good number did, because
Batman didn't.
No, Warner's and Batman did. They had much bigger budgets.
Yeah, it was all about the money, which just how it works always. But
it just, even though it's not that much different of a money deal for the actors, there's a lack of residual payments, and that means for Batman, there's some bookkeeper at Warner Brothers that every quarter has to send out a small check to the people, to the voice people, versus in Canada you get a payout. You get extra money up front, but they don't have to keep books for 30 years about how the show does. And that's one. So that was an advantage to working with Canadian casting. Of course, we had no say of it. It was a corporate decision. But they'd had really good luck with them before. So,
and you guys, I think you told me this last time you were on, but I forget. Wasn't it you didn't meet the people that were the voice actors for a long time?
Yeah, until after. Yeah,
Here's how you met the voice cast.
Yeah, we would get stale mailed audio cassettes of the vocal sessions. We give notes on those. But yeah, we didn't meet them in person. Sydney Iwander, the executive, did, and Larry Houston, the producer director, was up there when they did the second round of casting, because the first round of casting missed the mark. It just wasn't very cartoony. So they went up there to make sure we got these dramatic adult voices for the show. And so they'd met them, but it was too expensive on our budget to fly 3,000 miles to go up there, even just to say hello.
I mean, I guess we could have, we were paying freight on that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we only met them when we did the book in 2016, 17.
Wait, really? That was the first time you met them all?
Yeah. I'd never
on the phone.
Right.
On the phone. Still not in person yet.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those things that we were working so fast that I was focused on getting the first 13 scripts done.
Mm-hmm.
And the voice director up there was directing them, and we were still, giving notes on their voices, but there wasn't a couple months off there where I could just say, let's go up to Toronto and see who's doing the voices on our show.
Nice to meet you. We finally met Cal Dodd, George Buza, and Lenore Zann at a Texas Comic-Con in 2018. And that was the first time I'd physically met them. It was remarkable.
Now we've met 8 or 9 of them at Comic-Cons.
But it's at cons that we meet each other up, because they're still in Canada.
That's so funny. Because you guys had such good chemistry with Lenore when you were on. I thought, I was like, oh, well, they've known her. They probably met her a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad. But yeah.
That's so wild. I mean, I guess I was going to ask you about that too, because I was thinking, how did Batman get Mark Hamill? but like, I guess Warner Brothers had a
again, yeah,
budget. Yeah.
and back at the time, I bet Mark, even though he was the star of Star Wars, I bet he got like, guild minimum plus 20%. He voiceover acting was not, and even still is much less glamorous and much less high paid. It's for some actors, for some A-list actors, it's much more fun because they can slump in and in their jammies and do show without makeup. But it's something that I'm sure Mark did because he was such a huge comics geek. He would have done it for free. So they able get people like him. That good.
And the late Kevin Conroy. That is the voice of Batman for me.
Yeah, I mean,
same way that our cast is the voice of the X-Men for me.
I was just about to say, yeah, it's even, and I'm 40 now, and I still, those are the voices I hear when I read any comic or even like see a picture. Those are the voices I hear in my head.
Yeah.
Understood. Same here.
And maybe the three of us are biased, but I think a lot of people that way.
Oh, but Eric, one quick story about the voices. Bob Harris in the recording booth.
Oh yeah.
There was a problem with the first round of casting because Canada had typically been they had great voice talent, but they were used to doing cartoons. Like X-Men wasn't a cartoon. And so there was a real panic when the first set of voices came back on audio cassette. And you guys are going, oh, this is going to kill us.
Yeah. And so, but Larry and Sydney went up there and they spent a couple weeks with the voice director.
And Bob Harris from Marvel.
Yeah, Bob Harris and Joe Calamari from Marvel, but Joey the Squid, was their longtime Marvel employee, who was in charge of their audio, movies and TV order. It was a much smaller, it was a very small company. They there were no Marvel movies at the time. There had been attempts at TV shows over the years, but not much. Was been successful. So but anyway, Joe and Bob went and that were there from Marvel to make sure the casting was right. And Larry and Sydney were there. And Bob, who was in charge of all the X-Men books at the time, I think there were 4 of them. So he's probably working 80 hours a week to get those 4 books edited. But he told us what he's talking about. He had the most surreal experience in the recording booth because he'd grown up memorizing and living with these characters. He'd read every comic. He knew every character backward and forward. It was like they were family. But he'd only heard their voices as one imagined them in your head when you're reading a book.
Yeah, as everyone had up until then.
So, and then he's sitting there in 1990, March of 1992, and these actors are suddenly embodying Wolverine or Rogue or whatever. And he said it was just the most, the hair would go up on the back of his neck. He said, this is just crazy. This is my older brother, and I'm hearing him talk for the first time. And that was that we didn't go through that because we were crazed X-Men fans but that was the most remarkable experience like that we heard of during production, that here's somebody that was so invested in the characters and suddenly they came to life orally. And it was a big change for him.
2 quick ones. When Cal Dodd was, and everyone who was cast was among the very last that they'd heard because it just wasn't the right voice, wasn't the right sound. And when Cal Dodd came in and was looking at this, what's he like? I think Sidney Iwaner said through the glass, he's feral. And so Cal Dodd just starts growling in his throat, and everyone turns around. That's Wolverine. And then when George Buza is auditioning for Beast, or Hank McCoy, Sidney says to him, don't make him sound blue. Okay.
Yeah, because he looked to Sidney and to the voice director for
who is this thing?
For direction on this, erudite, thoughtful, kind, massive, hairy creature. And it's that was their way of saying, make him sound like a normal person, not like a creature. This isn't a strange cartoon where you're a big blue hairy thing. It's not, you're not Monsters Inc. or something. You're a scientist, and so playing like a scientist, not like a 600-pound blue person.
Well, I feel like that voice acting for Beast, like kind of or almost organically led to Kelsey Grammer playing him on screen. Like it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense from that voice, from like the voice we had from the cartoon, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm not going to argue that one. Yeah.
What did you guys think when X-Men started blowing up? Like, I don't know, did you guys ever know it would have this like wild lasting effect on the fandom?
Not at all. I mean, we knew that it was suddenly this very successful thing because we each worked on dozens of shows, and you try to do your best work always, and you never know what is going to connect with an audience.
True.
And we saw the huge numbers that we were getting, and it was gratifying and exciting, but it wasn't real. It wasn't. All it was, oh, looks like we're going to get a couple more years of work out of this, so we'll be able to pay our mortgage. But that was the only basic. It's not like if, say we were performing artists and 100,000 people were cheering and stomping for what we were doing. 100 million people were watching the show and liking it and responding to it, but they were all off somewhere while we were typing. So there was not an emotional realization or connection to its effect and its success until after we started going to cons. And
social media did not exist back then.
Social media didn't.
Fan letters. We didn't know.
Yeah. So that wasn't real to us until, you go into a con room and there's 1,500 people in the audience wanting to hear your panel and, hanging on your every word. And what is this? Okay, well, this is these people. It's like having a favorite song or favorite show when you're going up. For these 1,500 people, this is their favorite song, and we wrote it. And that's a really cool feeling.
That is so nice. And the two of you, listen, I could not think of a nicer couple more deserving of that love. The two of you are like the sweetest sweethearts. I tell everyone that. I'm like, they are the nicest, like as nice as you would want them to be. That's exactly how nice they're. Like, you guys are so good to your fans and so like involved and like, I don't know, just like very sweet. I remember the first time I interviewed you guys, for us, I don't even write for anymore, Primetimer, and you sent me a very nice like thank you letter, and I was like, this is so nice. Like, I feel like, I mean, I lucked out. My mother is pretty liberal too, but I feel like a lot of my values came from watching X-Men. It's like, yeah, couldn't a woman be president? It's there, she's there on X-Men, duh. Like
yeah, thank you for catching that. I love our female president on that one. And the older I get, the more I look like her. Someone asked me at a con once, were you the model for the president? I said, well, 30 years ago I wasn't, but I suppose I became it now. Okay.
That's funny. But like, I really I was rewatching the first two episodes today and I was like, God, I feel like this would be banned in Florida. Like, Jesus, like, ugh. And it's just like so nice to like show kids that like, oh, even if you like feel different or anything, like you will find a place, even if like Jubilee is, kind of, she has these adopted parents that aren't fully terrible, but like they don't kind of know what to do with her, right? And she finds this like chosen family. And like you said, the X-Men really are a dysfunctional family. They are a family unit. And I think that's kind of like what I was missing from like MCU movies is like, well, but I want them to be more of a family like the X-Men animated series was. And that's what has me looking forward to like more X-Men stuff from the MCU, because I just love that like the serialized storytelling on top of the like, oh, these people like, sometimes Wolverine hates Cyclops, but like they deal with each other because it's like a family member when like, oh, that aunt is really annoying me, but like, still your aunt, you still love her,
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree.
I mean, if you think about it, I'd never put it this way, but you could retitle the pilot episode Jubilee Finds a Family.
Yeah.
That could be the name of it. And that's the sweet side of this nonstop action filled superhero fight fest.
And that's one thing we didn't have a chance to explore. And I would have, looking back, that's one thing I would have liked to have explored, was the fact that she was in the foster care system. The parents that she's with are her foster parents. And we never got a chance to really examine how that happened to her, what that meant to her, how it works if you're in the foster care system. But the fact that she did then find the X-Men or they found her. It's like that. You're right. That's her found family. That
Yeah.
is absolutely.
Now I see the Jubilee right, but it's like she's right between the two of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
So was that kind of on purpose, or was it just kind of like that's the story you wrote? Were you like looking for more of that aspect, or did it just happen that way?
We were looking for. We chose Jubilee. We and Will Mineo, who really helped us with the first story. Will, who knew, who had been a Marvel person from before there was X-Men.
Artist, producer, director on X-Men. Yeah,
who was really the driving force of the series first season. He's one we lost for a season. We lost him to Exo Squad, which we all worked on as well. But
we'd all been let go.
Yeah, but in any case,
every time you mention a cartoon that you worked on as well, I'm like, it's aging me even more. I'm like, oh, I do remember those.
Yeah. So
excuse me, I got to just handle something over here, but I'll be right back.
She's handling one of our dogs. But so yeah, the intention was, Jubilee it's odd. It was almost secondary that she finds a family. That ended up being a great thing, and it really informed the rest of it. Where we realized this is all about this family going forward. But she was more chosen because we all hate artificial exposition. And the X-Men world is so strange and different to people who aren't used to it. We don't think of it now because we all know it. But the time, as Margaret Lesh told us, 85% of our audience is not going to know what a mutant is or who the X-Men are. So we have to be kind of careful and clear in introducing all this stuff, and how if you're just hanging out with them, they're not going to be explaining themselves to each other because they've been living together and working together for years. If there's a new person, and new person is a wide-eyed kid, which fits with our audience, then it's natural for the wide-eyed kid to ask all the questions the audience is going to ask. So the primary choice of Julie was just to be the POV of the audience, like, what is this strange new world we've all stepped into? Who are these people and why are they together? And so there's a reason for every single one of the X-Men to introduce himself or herself and to try to make sense to her, this kid, why they do what they do. And without her, we couldn't have told the story. I mean, the whole pilot just hinges on her experience of this new group of people.
I mean, I think I said this to you both before, but I still stand by that, like, just Night of the Sentinels, redo it live action, and that would be a perfect first X-Men movie.
Yeah, that would, it's something like that would be, it's funny how, they deciding to, what they try to decide. Movies are these like one-off things, and it used to be 100 minutes, now or it's 150 minutes, but because they're all longer. But we have a certain luxury in being able to tell multiple episodes and deal with one thing in one and one in another, and gradually take our time and get to know these people. But yeah, it's just, in looking back at it, pilots are very hard. We've worked on at least 15 shows where we've had some sort of hand in getting the pilot script together. And writing a show Bible is easy because you're kind of, you're pontificating about what it should be, but you haven't really written it yet. So the hard part is when actually making it all work in the pilot script. And there's some great ones, like the pilot script for Lost. Everybody's hooked on that show from the minute, from the first 5 minutes of the show, and who are these people and why are they there? It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stick the landing 5 years later.
Right.
But it means that you've hooked the audience and you've established, you're setting up what's going on. And it's the hardest part because you're having to do all that setup and tell a fun story at the same time, or a satisfying story at the same time. And it's a tough mixture. So very, very satisfied with, Mark.
It's funny that you mentioned Lost, because I will, even like today, I will still always say that I think the four best pilot episodes, because pilot episodes, you could love a show but be like, the first episode's rocky, or like wait a few episodes then you'll love it. But I always feel like X-Men, Twin Peaks, Lost, and Veronica Mars are like the best first episodes.
Oh, those are good calls.
Or excellent.
Yeah.
And boy. So thanks for keeping us in that company.
Yeah, I always do. And how did you get the idea for like what? I guess it was also the time period, but like the mall is such a freaking perfect first setting. Like it just is.
It is. And I think it came out of two things. One was three things. One's a ripoff and two are natural. If we're going to star Jubilee, that seems like the natural habitat for Jubilee.
In 1992.
In 1992.
Yeah.
That's where teens went.
Teens, you remember, the world was so mall-centric here.
I loved arcades in the mall.
Oh, yeah.
It made for great visuals. So as opposed to an open field or, some film noir downtown or something, it made for, to me, fun visuals. You're having a battle with a 50-foot robot. It makes it funny that it's in the mall. So you already have some great humor. And the third one was a little bit of I'm sure rip off in the back of our minds from Terminator. Where you got this kid and you've got a killer robot coming after him in the mall, and that it just worked beautifully. That was a place where this kid was vulnerable and this killing machine was walking through. So yeah, all those it was. Looking back, I can't imagine putting it anywhere else.
Also, looking again 30 years later, it was such a perfect way to indicate what the world of the series was, and that people would go to the mall. And some of those people would be mutants and you wouldn't know it.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was such a universal, this is what the day is like place for everybody.
Yeah, it let us get to meet Storm and Rogue while they're shopping, get Gambit while he's flirting. It was a good place to get half a dozen people established.
That's true. I guess also because, like something going back to Batman is more of like a weird, not quite reality like that it's set in. It's like a noir style. It's like very stylized. And I feel like having them all shows you, oh, this is like the real world. This is more like there are regular people, it's not whatever you would consider Batman set in. It's not that. It's more like grounded in reality. Which is, as a kid and as an adult, I'm always more drawn to like any kind of sci-fi or fantasy that is set more in a real world. That like but I also was wondering this, because you guys had like by the end you'd had almost every character at least appear in an episode.
Thanks to Larry Houston. All credit to him for the Easter eggs, but yes, sorry.
I was like, I think you told me it was Larry Houston. I remembered it was someone specific that you said that did that. Was there anyone that they were like, no, you can't use that person? Or
heck yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, there were, at the time, since Marvel had gone through so much financial trouble, it sold off various people like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and others to other companies. Legally, we were prohibited from using all sorts of Marvel characters, and probably 20 or 30 of the ones you saw in the background, Black Panther's back there, the all sorts of people like that. Spider-Man's wrist is there. Those things were all illegal. I mean, that was all Larry sneaking that stuff in and not claiming, not describing, not saying who it was, just saying it was.
That's
in
funny.
Black Panther's case, it was character sits on rock in Africa. So that's how he snuck a bunch of them in. But we weren't allowed to use probably 2/3 of the Marvel universe at the time. And so what you saw was him cheating.
Brilliantly.
I love that, because also there was it wasn't the same voice actors who voiced the X-Men in the Spider-Man episode when they were.
Oh, that was different because
that actually the guy, the Spider-Man showrunner wanted to have this crossover episode. It wouldn't have been legal because Sony was producing Spider-Man and they didn't have the rights to the X-Men characters. They took a month and they did the legal groundwork and allowed 5 X-Men characters or 4, however many there were, for that 2-part episode, for those 2 episodes, as a one-off, probably fees exchanged hands, but it was a very, it was very much done above board and had legal ramifications. So and yes, they used the same voice actors, and they had Michael Edens and me do the dialogue. They did, John Semper and his crew did the writing, the usual Spider-Man people, the story, but he had me and Michael write the dialogue for the X-Men characters for those 2 episodes.
That's interesting. I feel like that's a lot of work for 2 episodes of a kids cartoon, all that
Yeah.
Also, I didn't realize that Sony has owned Spider-Man for that long. I didn't realize even back then they.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think that Marvel was ever like, oh, we don't have money, so we're gonna sell the carrot
for nothing.
Yeah.
The rights to Spider-Man for $10 million. That that's the cartoon made in 3 hours this past weekend.
Seriously.
So.
I was waiting for that Spider-Man to pop up. He did not, but the Spider-Man Unlimited Spider-Man did. He's like in the background of a few scenes. Because I think that wasn't that the same same people doing Spider-Man who did the Unlimited, I think. Maybe.
Well, there were, I don't know who ended up. I think Will Mineo had a hand in the Unlimited when it came out after. There was a different set. It was a different set of creative people that did the 2 series. So I just don't know enough to ask Will or ask John Semper to get a sense of who did what, when, where. But yeah, there've been that was a fun time to because Marvel was just basically being supportive. They, whatever, John and his crew were doing on Spider-Man, they were supporting it, or whatever we did, they would give us notes, but it was Fox's show. And if we liked something and Fox liked something and Marvel didn't, it was like, well, sorry, which is not at all the case today.
I'd imagine not.
But it was an interesting time because all sorts of different people were making the different Marvel series with slightly different tones. The Fantastic Four had a different look and feel. Silver Surfer went in another direction. So the 90s was a fertile time for different people taking shots at Marvel characters.
And it's weird because I know some people will knock the continuity of kind of like what you said. It's like they were allowed to do a little bit creatively different things, and now it's like more standardized. But I do think you guys, I mean, X-Men specifically, but Spider-Man as well, kept like a pretty good continuity of this is our universe, but yes, there are other super powered folks, even if it wasn't specifically the Avengers or the X-Men, that you still got the idea that this was set in a universe with other superheroes, right?
Absolutely.
Was that on purpose, or was that a note they had, or?
I think it was more organic, actually.
Yeah,
that sounds right. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's organic. We weren't trying to do anything really outside of the books. In fact, we'd come up with characters, we'd come up with original stories, and then think, okay, this is a really good Beast story, a really good Wolverine story. We need this bad guy, we need this love interest, we need this, we need 3 or 4 characters. Let's look back to the books and see who fits our story well.
Right.
So it wasn't like we were in love with Lady Deathstrike and we're dying to put her in something. It was like we're servicing our main cast, and if we can freak Wolverine out and open up a story to ideas of dealing with, because there's the Shi'ar ship down there with the ladies, let's find somebody that Wolverine cared about. Oh, well, it's Lady Deathstrike. Okay, and then you learn everything you can about her and build the story from that point, as opposed to say a super fan saying, I'm going to do a Lady Deathstrike episode, so let's bend the series to her. It's like we were using her as kind of a reference point, or as material to tell what the story we needed to tell to make the show exciting.
Because I think you both told me this before too. Like you weren't like that big on X-Men until you did it, and then you had to learn about it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That is so impressive because if you had been like, yeah, of course I was an X-Men super fan before this, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I imagine you had to do so much research, like for every other episode.
Oh, for every episode. And this was at that time, there was no social media. There was no 24-hour Google. You couldn't go online and look something up. And bookstores weren't carrying compilations or, giant compilations of graphic novels. It was a very, research was a challenge back then.
And one of the great things about having good colleagues like Larry and Will and some of the writers, most of the artists and some of the writers were real X-Men geeks. So they'd have old comics. And it was like having a good professor. It simplified and focused our research. He said, well, if you're trying to learn about Sinister, well, there are 37 comics and these 4 are crucial. These are the ones where you really get to know them. So read those. Don't worry about the other 33. You're cool. So just good advice from people that knew the books and knew where to look and knew this. Oh, there's a whole run of them here that really don't fit the tone of our show. Like if you look back at the first couple of years, like when Stan and Jack were doing it, it was a very different feel. They were teenagers and they were in blue, and there's one girl who was off, making cookies and getting coffee, and they were doing a lot of fighting, but the basis, the heart and soul of the show of the books were there, but they were telling stories in a different way than so you look at a couple of those, okay, well, there's not a lot there. You look at the Claremont stuff and this is the kind of stuff where we can really mine story ideas or character moments or people that knew each other or loved each other or have grudges against each other.
Right there.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that there was good instruction. We got good instruction from people that knew the books about what would be appropriate for our 1990s X-Men show. And Bob Harris was one of them. I mean, since he knew them backwards and forwards, he was very specific about saying, look, there's some real riches over here. If you look, he basically had to take whatever stories we set, we did, but he was happy to direct us to the stuff he loved.
That's really nice. This just reminded me, I worked at Barnes & Noble a lot on and off in different ones. And I worked at one in Park Slope in Brooklyn, which is like a nicer area. And one time the guy who played Punisher and Daredevil came in and asked for Punisher graphic novels. And I was like, am I being tricked? Like, this feels like a trick. And I knew who he was, and he was wearing a jacket that said like Set Crew Daredevil.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, I guess I'm allowed to say, because they kind of don't want you to say anything to a celebrity.
Yeah, sure.
But I was like, oh, I think you're really great as Punisher. And he was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then he was asking me for comic recs, and it really felt like I was being tricked, but he was just a nice guy and he wanted to read up on the role. So he asked about it.
Would that be John Barenthal?
Yeah.
Oh my God, he's so good.
And Julia, he is gorgeous in person. But so nice, so polite. And it was just funny that he came in and he happened to ask the one comic nerd. And I was like, yeah, I can recommend stuff to you.
No, but that is the truth of it. And it comes down to, we talk about this, whatever's going on, it's all about your character and figuring out who your character is, what your character is, strengths, weaknesses, likes, dislikes, everything comes out of that. And if you can be consistent with your character, that's where you come up with your conflicts, your issues with each other. The whole point of this is to have big fights and spandex and blow things up. But underneath this, they have superpowers, but they're still human too, and the X-Men. And that, I think, was the angle the track you were taking was who are these people as people? And then how does that play out in this magic world of bright colors and explosions?
I often am I could only hope to write character. If I ever wrote anything superhero, I would want it to be X-Men. I always say could only hope to write a comic book like that, because you guys, it shows that you took the care with the characters and you wanted it to be, and not to knock Batman, but Batman was more like detective-y, more action-y focused.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
X-Men was a little bit more like, we have the action, but also, you know, there's, like we said, like Wolverine doesn't really like Cyclops. He loves Jean, and we have, you know, this like love triangle that isn't quite a triangle because she is with Scott, but you know, Wolverine still is pining after her, and Jubilee is sassy and a kid. And like, I also was noticing rewatching the first two, it's funny because like later on it's more Wolverine and Jubilee, but it starts off Jubilee and Gambit, where like she's more.
Yeah.
How did you get to Wolverine instead of it being Gambit?
I think we talked to well, first of all, I think she spent a little more time with Gambit, happened to be because of the way we choreographed the big fight at the mall.
Yeah. Their introduction to each other.
And we hadn't really thought of that we were building something there, but I think we were conscious once we were getting into the rest of the first season that she and Wolverine, I think after that moment where she blasts him in the inadvertent, you know, blasts him in the danger room.
To protect.
There was a real sense we got, okay, these two could be older brother, little sister, and for forever, and that there's something really there. And I think gradually, even though Gambit had some fun moments with her in the pilot, we were trying to keep him kind of loner and mysterious. So we pulled back on that. It was conscious that we moved her over to hang with Wolverine and let him feel protective of her, because it's so much fun playing. Wolverine is such this, you know, nasty, tough ass guy, and yet we constantly have him falling vulnerably in love with people and protecting Jubilee and just stuff that he would growl about and not admit. I mean, it really was very satisfying to write that relationship, those two.
And I think organically, that's how life goes too. You have your own relationship with someone, you have another relationship with someone else. It didn't feel forced or awkward. It just felt how these characters were growing.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I mean, she's 13. Of course, a 13-year-old might like focus on one person, but then focus on another person. And I also, as a child, had a crush on Gambit, but didn't realize, and I imagine Jubilee probably did too. And like, I think I had asked you this before, but when did you guys realize? Because I mean, I'm sure you know this. I feel like every gay nerd loves you guys. When did you guys realize you had such a like gay following from X-Men?
Pretty early in the con circuit.
Oh,
I mean, yeah,
around 2017, we started to go out and meet people, because again, we weren't getting.
We had the book, and I'd done research for the book, and we took a lot of testimonials. Because we're online, and we're talking. We had a website, and we're talking to people, and we said, well, look, you know, we're writing a book about this, about our experiences on the show. You know, do you guys have testimonials about what it meant to you when you were young watching the show? And we got dozens and dozens and dozens.
And that alone was gratifying.
And most of them, you know, some of them were just, you know, upbeat. Oh, it was my favorite show. And we all, my buddies and I all played the characters. But I'd say about half of them were, you know, I felt so different from everyone else around me. Yeah. And this show made me feel like there was a place for me. And perhaps half of that, 50%, were gay people. And, you know, there were people of color that were going through the same thing. You know, I was the only Black kid in my middle school. And I just didn't, I was despairing and didn't know, you know, who to talk to and where. And then I look at these strange mutants that are given worse trouble than I'm given, and they making a family. Yeah. And so, yeah, that we got that real early in writing the first book and going to the first cons, that there was a big gay contingent for. I mean, it only makes sense.
I mean, yeah.
The core conceit of the X-Men is you're born this way.
Yeah.
And you don't really find out about it. You don't know. Not at birth. You know, it happens during adolescence, puberty, as you're getting older. Everybody on the planet, if you go through adolescence and if you go through puberty, your body changes. I mean, Come on. That's its own personal body horror movie right there. But to add to it various, you know, societal demands and, you know, it became even more gratifying to sense that to sense that we had played a part in providing a safe place.
You guys really, really did. And like, I hope you're proud of yourselves with that, because like, there are so many, like anytime I go to a con and I'm at like hanging out with gay friends, we end up talking about X-Men. And I'm always like, there are sweet ex-parents. They raise a ton of gay children. They just don't realize it.
All right.
And
I like that.
And it's funny that you say that. I had, do you know who Ming-Na Wen is? She was the voice of Mulan.
Isn't she a Disney princess, for God's sake?
Yes.
Or she's a triple now, right? She was
Yeah.
Mulan. She is, yeah, she's a three. She's a big one.
She kind of told a story similar to that. I had her on the podcast. She's a sweetheart. She's so nice. And I didn't realize she's a big nerd like us.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, she was like, oh, I was in sci-fi book club in high school, and like I was the only girl. And I was like, you were? She was like, yeah, there weren't a lot of, I like didn't know any other girls that were like nerds like me. But she kind of told a similar story. I asked her that. I was like, you know how many gay fans you have? And she said she didn't realize till she started doing cons that from Mulan, which to be honest, I think I was a little bit too old, like not too old, but you know, like when you're a teen and you're like, oh, I'm too old for cartoons now. That's that's where I was when Mulan came out. So I like didn't watch it back then. But she said when she started doing cons, she had a lot of like LGBT people and like trans folks that would come up to her and be like, this meant so much to me. And she had no idea till she started doing cons. Oh. So it's like funny, like how you can find out later, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I will say that, and I will agree with you. And it's really nice for us. Here we are talking to you, century 2023. You know, we didn't know in the 1990s, you know, where this was going to go, what, you know, who it was going to reach. And this is, for us, this is fun. This is like sort of valedictory, or you know, like victory lap. We get to go out and meet people who like something we did. Yeah. And we don't have to do anything. We can just say thank you. Yeah. It's already been done. So thank you.
Yeah. And the fact that the very nice X-Men crazed people that are in charge of X-Men 97.
Oh my God.
Chose to involve us and Larry Houston in a small way as consultants in the new show that's coming out soon, you know, or sometime next year.
Sometime, we don't know when for sure.
We don't know when for sure. We just know 2024.
We know that? Okay.
We know that, dear.
Okay.
So, but that was because we're out here in Hollywood. We see it all happen 95 times out of 100. If you did something, even if you did something successful and special, when the new group of people are doing it, they don't think to call, they don't think to involve you. And the fact that they did was really gratifying. And it was, I mean, it's their show. I mean, we will not take credit for, you know, creating, but it is a continuation of the old show. Yes. And that also is gratifying. They didn't say, oh, we'll do a spinoff or go to another universe or have a new group of people or not have it connected. They expect the audience that loved the old show to just take this as the next episode.
Yeah. Season 6.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. Like I'm trying to think of a time when that's, I can't, especially like for like a kid's cartoon that's been done, where it's like, yes, this is a continuation. A zillion years later, we are continuing it. Like that's like kind of unheard of, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I can only think of, I'm going to say Family Guy and Futurama, but there was not a 30-year gap in there.
Right. Yeah.
5-year gap in there. Yeah. It's just a couple, 3 seasons, and we're back. But yeah, no, this is the first time I've seen this happen too, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
But I am really glad they brought you guys on, because I mean, duh, of course they should.
But as Eric said, the passion they bring, the commitment they bring to this is very exciting. And we've seen things, and that's all I'm going to say. But
I love when I have anyone who's working on or has worked on or any kind of Marvel thing, they're like, I can say this one thing and that's it. So I would never try to get any more, because I know how intense that can get. But thank you both so much for doing this. It is always a freaking pleasure to talk to the two of you. And like, you know, I feel like a lot of times people say, don't meet your heroes, they'll let you down. But like, you two have never freaking let me down. And like, it means a lot to me. Like growing up as like this big nerd who didn't have a lot of friends, and like, the fact that the people who were behind my favorite thing as a kid are still like really, really cool is nice.
Oh, that makes me so happy. But again, Eric and we met at Disney Afternoon TV. My first professional job as a writer was writing for Chippendales Rescue Rangers. And from there, I never looked back. I jumped on that train and I hung on for dear life. But I'd come out from Texas and didn't know anybody. It took me 10 years to break in. I say that just so folks know what the grind was like.
Yeah.
You came out from Tennessee and it took you a while to crack the doors open for yourself. At Disney Afternoon, writing on Chippendales Rescue Rangers, the guy in the office next door writing on Chippendales Rescue Rangers happened to be this guy, and that's how we met.
Ah.
And this is, again, way before internet, way before all that stuff, but just sort of sounding each other out. I was the huge solo geek sci-fi gal growing up in Texas, and Star Trek reruns were the thing that it's like, those are my people. Whatever that is, those are my people. And you like the original.
I memorized the original series, and so we'd have.
I'd recorded it on audio cassette myself as a kid, because that's all you could do.
With trivia contests between each other.
You think not?
Yeah, right.
No, in this episode when that happened. So I say this is that we are each fans of things, and I have been that. I still am. To be a fan of something, I know how that feels. I know what that means, and I'm thrilled to be a part of something that is that for someone else.
That has a big community of people, that share this, and it's great. It's we didn't plan this. She came out here to write TV. I came out here to write movies, and it happened. The first door that opened for me was at Hanna-Barbera, and the first one opened for her was at Disney. And as our friends say, if it had been a sitcom or if it had been something else, we would have gone in a different direction.
That's what I mean. We never would have met.
We just wanted to be part of telling stories, and you go with the flow. You go where the work is, and suddenly, in the mid '80s, they needed a lot more animation writers, and I was there. I was ready.
And then late '80s, things started to explode at Disney. I got to share this because we didn't know this until Eric was writing previously on X-Men, the oral history.
I don't know if we've shown this to you.
But we may have shown this to you, and I apologize if we have. But the voice of Apocalypse, and
who's one of our 2 or 3 favorite voices on the show, by far.
I am the rocks on the eternal shore, but crash against me and be broken. We didn't find out until you were writing this book, and sadly, the actor had passed away. We didn't realize this, but the actor who's the voice of Apocalypse is a Canadian actor named John Colicos. And he was
the first
Klingon in Star Trek, the original series.
Okay, wait, you did not tell me that. That is freaking cool.
Okay, there he is. He even got a stamp. John
I love that.
And so for us to find that out, it's like, what?
We wrote
on a show that had something to do with someone who was in the original Star Trek. What? I mean, my heart exploded in a good way. So yeah, if you raise a glass, raise one to John Colicos.
That is so cool that you were Star Trek fans, and then later you find out that you worked with. That's so cool.
If we'd only known. If we'd only known, we might have made it up there to Canada.
Yeah, then we would have flown up.
Then you're like, okay, now I will pay to fly to Canada.
Oh yeah. This must be done. Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, again, thank you guys so much. Always a pleasure talking to both of you.
You too.
Keep in touch. And thanks. Thank you everyone for listening, and make sure you follow Julia and Eric on all social media and tell them where they can find you.
We are X-Men TAS, which is for X-Men the Animated Series. So xmentas.com. We have a blog that we don't get around to updating, but it's very Twitter active. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. I am on Twitter way too much. That's kind of where I just enjoy.
We both are.
Posting things and stuff. And if you want to email us, find us on one of these things, and we have our email address available there. And we're here living the X-Men dream. And looking forward to the rest of the year here. We're starting to get our toes dipped back in the con circuit.
Oh,
and
nice.
If you guys want us at a con in your neighborhood, let your local con people know.
We're available.
When I have my con, I'll make sure to book the two of you.
There you go.
We are pleased, since we saw you last, X-Men, the art and making of the animated series, that the book that came out,
The art
The
book.
Blessing of Disney and Marvel, is now out officially in Spanish.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm
Cool.
pointing to this one right here. You can't tell, but it has been printed in Spanish language, which is like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So now hopefully we can travel to some Spanish language speaking countries if I can practice on my Duolingo. But at least the book is in Spanish now. So.
Well, thank you. This was a delight. And I'll talk to you guys later, okay?
Please.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.